the right page of everything.
Hey, I thought this was the Sabbath summer. Alright, I need to get one thing. Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here for our next installment of our Sunday Serenades series. And I hope this is a good respite from the very hot temperatures outside. We are delighted to welcome you here to Louisville Presbyterian, and you're in for a real treat as we enjoy masterworks for guitar by the great Austro-Hungarian composer Josef Kaspar Merz. And our very own Dr. Lily Hunter will perform. She recently completed her doctoral studies at University of Arizona. And also at the door, you will have a program. I hope everyone picked one up. And please feel free to join our concert mailing list. And if you'd like to join us for a light reception afterwards, there will be one in St. Andrew's Hall. And so please give a warm welcome to Dr. Lily Hunter.
Yeah, well, it's always nice to make an entrance. So today's program is going to be, first of all, can everyone hear me if I speak? There we go. Is going to be a little different. It's going to be a mixture of music and me speaking at you. So my dissertation topic was on the opera fantasies by, as John mentioned, the Austro-Hungarian composer Josef Kaspar Merz. He wrote a collection of 33 pieces based on different 19th century operas. So what I'm going to do today is play a couple of those pieces for you, and also talk a little bit about some of the things he does in those pieces and why they're really cool and more people should know them. So we'll start first with the Opera in Review number 2, which is based on Lucia de Lammermoor. And this one is, it's an interesting piece and a little bit different from some of the others in that he only chooses one primary theme, and he does it as a theme in variations. And it's Edgardo's aria from the last act, Tu che a Dio spiegaste l'ali. So I hope you enjoy. So I must admit, I planned this program a little bit selfishly. So now I'm going to give you a sort of the talking portion, which is actually my dissertation defense from back in April, to give my hands a little bit of a break, because it's a bit of a workout. So, John, do you want to do the slides? Yeah, just hit space. So we have some a lot of technical things happening in this particular presentation. Yeah. So the title of my dissertation was The Operatic Guitar, Selected Study of the Opern Revue, Opus 8 by Josef Kaspar Merz. So Josef Kaspar Merz was one of the premier guitarists and composers of the mid-19th century. However, extant scholarship has been primarily restricted to a handful of pieces from his prolific output. This dissertation broadens the conversation on Merz and his contributions to Romantic music by using his Opern Revue Opus 8, a collection of 33 pieces based on operatic themes, to examine the 19th century musical landscape. In the Biedermeier era, the guitar experienced a surge of popularity with the rise of the middle class. However, by the time Merz arrived in Vienna in 1840, the guitar was on the decline, as it began to be replaced by the piano. The guitar and piano played similar roles in early 19th century musical life as solo or ensemble instruments used in both private and public spheres, and there was likely some stylistic exchange among the music composed for the two instruments. As the century progressed, the piano supplanted the guitar in both realms. As a result, the majority of scholarship on operatic paraphrases has been confined to the keyboard repertoire, and Merz's opera fantasies have been mostly excluded from scholarly conversations, not only as noteworthy examples of mid-19th century guitar composition, but also as a major facet of the genre of operatic paraphrase. Through an investigation of 5 selected pieces from the Opern Revue, my dissertation considers different elements of 19th century music, such as virtuosity, narrative issues within operatic transcriptions, the reception of opera, and the change in musical tastes that contributed to the decline in popularity of the guitar. Although many of these elements have been discussed previously in relation to piano music, the two instruments did not exist in separate realms, and the study of how these elements are manifested in Merz's paraphrases for the guitar is worth careful examination. Although Merz was one of the leading guitarists and composers of the first half of the 19th century, little is known of his life. Kasparas Josephus Merz was born on August 17, 1806, in Pressburg, Hungary, present-day Bratislava. By 1840, Merz had left Pressburg and relocated to Vienna, where he gave his debut at the Hofburg Theater on November 29th. Merz embarked on a concert tour throughout Europe in 1841. In 1842, he married pianist Josephine Plantin, and they continued to tour together, often performing duets for piano and guitar of their own composition. The couple returned to Vienna in 1843, where Merz began establishing himself as a teacher and composer, beginning publication of the first pieces of the Opern Revue. Merz was diagnosed with neuralgia in 1846 and prescribed strychnine. Unfortunately, Josephine, who was not familiar with the drug, gave him the entire dosage at one time. It is popular belief that during his 18-month convalescence period, Merz listened to his wife play the piano, which in turn had an influence on the unique sound and right-hand techniques he utilized in his compositions. Whether this story is true or not, it is clear that Merz drew inspiration from the piano music of Liszt, Chopin, Mendelssohn, and Schumann, setting him apart from his contemporaries, who tended to look back towards more classical models or towards imitating vocal music. Russian nobleman Nikolai Makarov highlights these different characteristics of Merz as a composer, pointing out things like the presence of a clear melodic line over continuous arpeggios or chordal accompaniments. This particular texture became a hallmark of Merz's compositional style and illustrates the pianistic influences in his music. Works based on operatic themes were at the height of their popularity in the early to mid-19th century, and were composed in great abundance by many composers for a variety of solo instruments and ensembles. Opera fantasies ranged in difficulty from didactic pieces intended for amateurs to brilliant concert works for virtuoso performers. The works of Franz Liszt and Sigismund Thalberg come to mind as pinnacles of the genre. Opera played a major role in the musical and social life of most cities, and the premieres of new works were eagerly anticipated. Each new work brought with it a multitude of new themes and tunes that permeated all levels of society and provided new material for amateurs and virtuosos alike, as paraphrases and fantasies were composed for almost every combination of instruments. The desire to capitalize on the extreme popularity of opera led composers in all mediums to write fantasies, paraphrases, potpourris, and other compositions based on themes from operas old and new. This can be seen in the compositional output of pianists like Thalberg and Liszt, and on the guitar side, it is evident in the works of Mauro Giuliani, including his Rossinienne, 6 large-scale pieces for solo guitar based on multiple themes from Rossini operas, first published in 1820, and, of course, in the Opern Review by Merz. Like many of his contemporaries, Merz composed numerous opera fantasies throughout his career, and these pieces make up a large portion of his compositional output. His concert works in this genre typically contained an introduction and finale that, quote, stood out by their sophistication and diversity, so that taken separately, they consisted of something that can powerfully satisfy any amateur, end quote, and provided a framework for his masterful settings of the opera melodies. Merz's opera fantasies fall primarily into 3 categories: the Portefeuille for Guitar de Spiele, the Opern Review Opus 8, and unpublished works for 8 and 10-string guitar. In the Opern Review, and in his larger fantasies in general, Merz seeks to maintain a balance between virtuosity and lyricism when organizing the melodies into theme blocks. In order to make sure that the lyrical melodies are not overshadowed by the more pyrotechnic passages, Merz typically places them in the middle of the theme block, using them as a sort of capstone for the overarching form of the fantasia. Placing the lyrical themes in such a prominent position ensures that the musicality of both the performer and the composition remain at the forefront and do not become subsumed by technical fireworks, compromising the musical integrity of the piece. One of the effects of the rise of instrumental virtuosi was the emergence of the composer-performer, who was now writing pieces that specifically highlighted their own personal virtuosity. By exploring the themes he set and the different techniques he used to capture the virtuosity present in Rossini's music, I will demonstrate how Merz worked to advance the technical and musical capabilities of the guitar through his arrangement of Il Barbiere di Siviglia. For his paraphrase, Merz takes all of his source material from music in the first half of the first act and uses 2 primary arias, Eco ridente, sung by the Count, and Una voce poco fa, sung by Rosina, as the main structural focus of his piece. Merz condenses the opening chorus of the opera into a singular opening section while retaining the overall ABA structure. He expertly synthesizes all the elements of Rossini's orchestration, manipulating them in such a way that he is able to showcase the abilities of the guitar to capture the character of an entire orchestra. Merz's setting of the Count's first aria, Eco ridente, begins with an unadorned, simple presentation of the primary melody, which we will now hear. You just press spacebar. Yeah. Rossini includes 4 iterations of this initial melody in his opera. Merz, on the other hand, has 5 repetitions of the phrase. The second repetition begins in a similar manner, but rather than allowing the melody to continue, Merz interrupts it with the inclusion of the sextuplet figure played by the upper winds in the orchestral opening of this number. The orchestral interruption leads the listener to believe that Merz has begun to transition from Eco ridente to his next theme, However, he subverts this expectation by reintroducing the Count's melody, further emphasizing the overall importance of this theme in his piece. After the return to Eco Ridente, Mertz presents the melody 3 times successively, with each presentation becoming increasingly more ornamented and complex, before the last iteration of the melody eventually leads into the transition to the next thematic section. Up until this point, Mertz had been focused on capturing Rossini's orchestration. In these 3 phrases, we finally see his interpretation of Rossini's vocal style. One of the hallmarks of Rossini's vocal writing was a mixed style that incorporated a syllabic texture and vocalese consisting of groups of multiple notes or irregular figures on individual syllables of a word. Ornamental figures in Rossini's melodies are supposed to feel as if they have evolved naturally from the melodic line, not as if they have been superimposed on top of it. Throughout these 3 phrase repetitions, we see Mertz imitating this vocalese texture in his guitar writing through the inclusion of rapid ornamental figures. By having the initial presentation of the melody be unornamented, he allows his listeners to experience the organic development of the melody from its simplest forms to the coloratura figures that appear in later iterations. Mertz's fantasy, Der Barbiere von Sevilla, is one of the clearest examples of how Mertz used and incorporated different musical influences. In this piece, we are given a look into Mertz's virtuosity as a composer and the way that he adapts different facets from each source and combines each ingredient to produce the final product. By doing so, he is able to remain faithful to the original opera while simultaneously using everything the guitar has to offer and allowing the player's virtuosity to shine through in technical and musical capacities. Speaking of technical. Like I said, there's a lot of moving pieces. Discussions concerning the existence of a narrative structure in music have been taking place since the 19th century, when the debate between absolute and programmatic music first emerged. This had particular importance for operatic paraphrases, as these were instrumental pieces and therefore elevated above the need for a narrative, according to proponents of absolute music, but they were based on works that had a very clear narrative and dramatic structure. It is true that oftentimes composers of paraphrases would alter the narrative scheme of the original opera by presenting themes in a different order, but it can be argued that this is not a misrepresentation of the operatic narrative, but rather a different perspective through which to view its dramatic contents. The selection of multiple themes from Rigoletto indicates that Mertz is trying to capture the entire dramatic breadth of the work, rather than focus on one incident or scene. The narrative throughout Mertz's fantasy is driven by the personal relationships between the 3 main characters, Rigoletto, Gilda, and the Duke. Mertz does not introduce the supernatural element of a curse, as Verdi does in the opera. He takes his characterizations of Gilda and the Duke directly from Verdi, emphasizing Gilda's innocence and the Duke's licentiousness. However, with the character of Rigoletto, Mertz focuses on his role as a father, not as the caustic court jester, and chooses his melodies accordingly. Our first introduction to Meritz's characterization of Rigoletto is through his intense cabaletta, Cortigiani Violrazza Donata, taken from Act 2. At this point in the opera, Rigoletto has realized that his daughter Gilda has been abducted by the courtiers and has gone to confront them. Verdi underscores Rigoletto's contempt for the courtiers through frenetic, rushed sextuplets in the strings, as if he is barely containing himself. And should he allow the music to evolve into a typical cabaletta, he will no longer be able to control his fury and despair. After the initial presentation of the theme, Meritz allows his Rigoletto to unleash some of his rage through an extended variation, where he underscores the melody with a rapid tremolo figure, indicative of the character's simmering emotions. The fact that this theme is placed first and is given an extended variation treatment highlights its importance in his narrative. Right from the beginning, Meritz ensures that the listener recognizes the character of Rigoletto not as the acerbic entertainer, but as a father trying to protect his daughter at all costs. So we'll hear the initial presentation of Cortigiani Violrazza Donata, followed by the variation. With the second theme, Meritz introduces the character of Gilda as a foil to her father, with a simple yet graceful arrangement of caro nome. In the transition between the two themes, Gilda's opening rhythmic motif of a dotted 8th and 16th note gradually takes over and calms the frantic tremolo and scalar passages associated with Rigoletto. Moving from the second theme to the third theme, Questa o Quella, is the only time Meritz does not have any sort of pause between melodies, through either a fermata or rest. Instead, Gilda's caro nome is completely overwhelmed and consumed by the music of the Duke's opening aria, with the last E of Gilda's theme alighting with the first note of the accompaniment pattern of the Duke's music. By positioning caro nome between the music of Rigoletto and the Duke, Meritz has set up Gilda as central to the struggle between the two male characters. The unpretentious nature of her music serves as an emotional contrast to the fury of Rigoletto and the frivolity of the Duke. In his choice of themes, Meritz has managed to capture elements of the central conflict between Rigoletto and the Duke, while avoiding much of the darkness associated with Verdi's opera. He has instead primarily focused on themes in major tonalities and used them to create a narrative that was more centered on the father-daughter relationship of Rigoletto and Gilda, juxtaposed with the carefree nature of the Duke. The action of the opera culminates in Gilda's death. In Mertz's fantasy, the listener is led to understand that there is a conflict, but the death of a main character is not something with which Mertz is concerned. Parallels can be drawn between Mertz's treatment of themes in the Open Review and Liszt's in the Reminiscence de Don Juan, as may be seen in Charles Rosen's discussions of Liszt's paraphrases. They, quote, juxtaposed different parts of the opera in ways that bring out a new significance, while the original dramatic sense of the individual number and its place within the opera is never out of sight, end quote. Mertz's free arrangement of the themes brings to the forefront a different aspect of the story. Instead of presenting Rigoletto as a bitter character, hell-bent on exacting revenge from the Duke, and thus ultimately falling victim to Monterone's curse, Mertz focuses his characterization of Rigoletto on his role as a devoted father, driven to protect his daughter. This aspect of Rigoletto's character is present in Verdi's opera, but Mertz chooses to highlight it and make it central to the narrative he is trying to portray. By the time Mertz arrived in Vienna, Bellini had been dead for 5 years, but his far-reaching influence is evident in the first 10 pieces of Mertz's Opern Review, which rely almost exclusively on operas of the bel canto tradition. The initial installment of the Opern Review was one of the first things Mertz chose to publish. It stands to reason he would choose as his first source works by composers like Bellini that had an enduring popularity with the Viennese public. In adapting Bellini's I Puritani to the guitar, Mertz chose a total of 5 themes from throughout the opera. The 2 most important themes in his fantasy are placed towards the beginning. The first is Elvira's aria, Vien diletto e in ciel la luna, and the second is the quartet, A Teo cara amor. These first melodies make up the bulk of the theme block, and we can speculate as to the reasons behind Mertz's decision. But given that this paraphrase was one of the first pieces he published upon his return to Vienna, during a time when he was trying to establish his reputation, it can be assumed that marketability was something that would be foremost in his thoughts. Yeah. Wait, you went too far. Sorry, more technical stuff. Much like the Bellini operas, Mertz's use of multiple Donizetti works as sources for the first installment of the Opern Review was strategic. Because this collection was his debut as a composer rather than a performer of large-scale works, the fact that he relied so heavily on Donizetti as an operatic source indicates his hope that he might be able to benefit from Donizetti's reputation. Mertz opens the Opern Review with 2 paraphrases on Donizetti operas, Lucrezia Borgia and Lucia di Lammermoor. As mentioned earlier, this collection of opera paraphrases was one of the first things Mertz began publishing upon returning to Vienna, and therefore their success was integral to his establishment in musical society. We can assume, through the inclusion of these fantasies, he was trying to use the popularity of Donizetti and the operas as a whole by showing his audiences that he could encapsulate the ethos of the opera through the synthesis of their themes with his own original writing. Mertz published the first installment of the Opern Review at a critical time in his career. The reception of these first 10 pieces would have been imperative to his success, and the fact that he so heavily relied on works by Bellini and Donizetti speaks to his confidence in their unwavering popularity with the Viennese musical public. Opera paraphrases are in many ways a uniquely 19th century genre. Examination of the operas and themes selected by the composers of these pieces can give us a window into the popular trends of the mid-19th century, which operas eventually fell out of favor and which held an enduring place in the opera house. Through his opera fantasies, Mertz explored multiple dimensions of 19th century music. He used his large-scale fantasies to develop the virtuosic capabilities of the guitar. In these pieces, Mertz consistently illustrates his talent as a composer by making full use of all the guitaristic tools available to him to capture the effect of a full orchestra on a single instrument. The sheer breadth of the open review allowed Mertz to explore the different dramatic aspects of the opera paraphrase. In a collection that spanned Italian, German, and French traditions, Mertz offered his audiences an in-depth view of many facets of early to mid-19th century opera, and illustrated not only the guitar's ability to capture the scope of an entire opera, but also its versatility in moving between national styles. As the popularity of the guitar began to decline, Mertz worked to bolster public opinion of the instrument by continuing the conversation between the piano and the guitar, illustrating through his opera paraphrases the musical and dramatic capabilities of the guitar. The Open Review is a unique window into the world of the guitar in Vienna in the mid-19th century, as both instrument and composer tried to navigate the changing tides of public musical taste. Unfortunately for Mertz and the guitar, the trends in musical development were against him. As Romantic composers began to explore increasingly chromatic writing and ever-expanding harmonic relationships, the guitar was not as well equipped to handle these developments as the piano. Despite his best efforts, Mertz was unable to recapture the, quote, golden age of the guitar, and throughout the second half of the century, the instrument's popularity in Northern Europe continued to decline. One of the things that hurt the reputation of the guitar was that it was not included in the formation of what would become the Western musical canon, and it continued to exist on the periphery of musicological discussions. It is the intention of this dissertation to expand musicological conversations surrounding the landscape of the 19th century by illustrating that the guitar played an essential role in musical life and can be used as a lens through which to view the ebb and flow of the social and cultural currents of the century. Thank you. John, do we want to do like questions? We can, if anyone has any questions, we can do a few minutes for questions. Otherwise, I can just launch right back into playing stuff. Yeah.
In the beginning, you mentioned that classical guitar started becoming less popular because of piano. Do you know what the reason for that was? And also, was the keyboard built after the guitar, or did it come later?
Keyboard instruments have been around. I don't know the exact history of the keyboard instruments. The guitar has been around for centuries, but the keyboard has as well, though. The reason for the decline in sort of the popularity of the guitar was there was a lot of things going on, especially in Vienna. Shortly after the Napoleonic Wars in sort of 1815, Austria was a very cash-poor society, and the guitar is cheaper, quite frankly. So it became really popular as a sort of a social instrument, as a salon instrument, as a way for people to have this cultural exchange when they might not have the economic power that they once had. As the society stabilized and grew more prosperous, the piano became a status symbol. Once you got to a certain point where you could afford to have a piano, it became a very visible sign of wealth, and so it's something that people strove for. As the piano became sort of more popular with consumers, the piano never fell out of popularity. I don't want to give that impression. It's just that the guitar kind of experienced a little bit of a surge. But then once the piano sort of, again, became this status symbol, there wasn't really the need for the guitar, people felt. So it kind of got pushed to the side. There was also a shift in sort of music making in general. Again, sort of in what became known as the Biedermeier era in Vienna, there was a focus on music making in the home. And that's something for which the guitar is very well suited. As music making sort of became a more public event, where you got the rise of big concerts and concert series, we just didn't have the volume to compete, unfortunately. And it was going to be until about the mid-20th century that we were able to make sort of real advances in the volume of the instrument. So that was just sort of a practical side of things. If you're trying to fill a hall with 700 plus people and you can't hear the instrument, it's not going to work out so well. Oh, I forgot to bring. So the instrument of Meritz's era actually looks very similar to the modern classical guitar. The main difference that you will see is that the body of the guitar, this part, is going to be much smaller. It's about maybe 75% of what this is. And it's much thinner. The neck length is also a little bit shorter. But by and large, by the time we hit the 19th century guitars are recognizable as what we think of as a modern classical guitar. So. Anyone else?
Say a little bit about Taurus.
About Torres? Why?
Because it's the modern guitar.
I mean, I know a little bit about that, but not a lot. Yeah. The modern classical guitar, sort of as we think of it, was sort of pioneered by a luthier in Spain named Fernando Torres. And he's the one who sort of made it bigger. There were developments on the inside with how you brace the soundboard. Basically, the lighter the bracing, the thinner the soundboard, and the more it will vibrate. Ergo, the more sound you can get out of it. So he sort of kicked off what became the revolution in classical guitar building in the 20th century. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your performance.
Thank you.
You're very good.
Thank you.
I was wondering, do you play any other styles of guitar music or play any other types of guitar?
So I've been focusing on classical sort of for a while. When I was, in high school, I fooled around with electric guitar and things like that. But professionally, I've been sort of largely focused on classical. So, anyone else? Okay. So I have one more piece for you guys. So this is going to be Meritz's Fantasy on Rigoletto, which I know I spent a lot of time talking about. So I hope that as we go through, you can hear sort of the different themes he uses and how all of these themes interact. And if you're familiar with the opera at all, it might give you a little bit of a different picture on, or a different perspective, let's say, on what's happening. So this is the Open Review number 21 on Rigoletto. Hello? Okay. We have a slight surprise, celebration, I don't know how you want to say it. So Meritz's birthday is actually August 17th. So we're going to have a little birthday celebration in honor of Meritz. He had a rough life, we need to celebrate him while we can. All right.
Good job, well done. Should we sing him happy birthday?
Yeah, why not?
Where
Do you
should
want
I
to lead
put
it? I don't know.
All right,
You
ready
can just hold
again?
it.
Let's sing it. Here we go. 3, 4.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Joseph. Happy birthday to you. Oh, you gotta wait for that. This summer, Boonsville's pastors have been preaching on the Sabbath, and this was such a beautiful part of my day, enjoying your lovely music and such musicality. And boy, I could listen to you play for hours. And Lily, we're so proud of you. You're finished completing your doctorate, and you have quite the mastery of the guitar. And we can't wait to see where it takes you on your journey. Please join us. We'll have a light reception in St. Andrew's Hall, just outside to the left, and we have some little mini cupcakes to celebrate. Thank you all.
Here.